Hello, this is Professor James Strickler, and this is a course in American government. This lesson is from Unit 11, about public policy. It's Lesson 5, about economic policy. In this lesson, you'll learn about economic policy, about gross domestic product, about the free market economy, about the business cycle, about unemployment, and about inflation. As I said, this lesson is about economic policy. Well, what does that mean? What are we talking about when we say economic policy? Economic policy refers to government actions, something that the government does to influence how things are produced, distributed, consumed. The kind of things we're talking about are goods and services. This is about people buying and selling things, and the government trying to have some role in how that is done. When we talk about economic policy, one of the things that we're most concerned about is about the strength of the economy. In other words, how successful are people in America being at buying and selling things to make wealth for themselves? The overall strength of the economy is generally measured by something called gross domestic product, or GDP for short. What GDP is the sum value, in other words, the total amount of all the goods and services that people make that then they try to sell to other people, that other people are willing to buy. So it's the total production of the country during a certain time period. Usually it's an annual measure. Each year the government estimates the gross domestic product of the entire country and compares that to previous years. Matter of fact, they keep track of it on a quarterly basis, even within years, to try to see if the economy is actually growing or getting smaller. In our system of economics, the thing that has the greatest influence on whether the economy is going to grow or not is the free market. Now, we talked about the free market in a previous lesson in this unit. Just briefly described it as we were talking about the problem of monopoly. Remember what a free market is. It is the underlying assumption of our economy that business transactions will be freely engaged in an open market. So when we talk about a free market, what we're really talking about is that people can buy and sell whatever they want to whoever they want at whatever price they agree upon. This is the basic idea of how our economy works. So with that in mind, we need to realize that with the economy based on a free market, it's these individual choices that people make in deciding what they will buy and sell, what they will produce, what they will consume, that drives the economic strength of our country. It's not what the government is doing. Instead, it's what private individuals are doing. Those private individual choices then follow a pattern, which we can call the business cycle. Let me explain this. To do so, we're going to build a diagram which will illustrate for you what we mean by the business cycle and basically how it works. On this, when I said diagram, I guess maybe I should say a graph. On this graph, we're going to have two axes, and we are going to have them represent different things. The horizontal axes will represent time. In other words, we're progressing from the past to the future along this axis, from left to right. The vertical axis will represent gross domestic product, that measure of how much our economy is making. And so as we go from the bottom up to the top of the graph, we're showing that the gross domestic product of the country is getting bigger. So what happens in the business cycle is that the strength of the gross domestic product, in other words, the total production of our country, fluctuates over time. At some times, the gross domestic product is growing. At other times, it's getting smaller. It goes up and down in this cyclical way. During the times when the economy is growing, in other words, we are producing more gross domestic product, we call that a recovery or an expansion. Now, why it's called a recovery, you'll see in just a moment. But keep those two terms in mind. Now, they may actually technically mean slightly different things, but they're close enough for you to understand. We're talking about the economy growing when we use the term recovery or we use the term expansion. During times when the economy is getting smaller, we call it a recession or a contraction. Expansion and contraction are kind of opposites of each other. When you hear the term recession commonly used, people are talking about bad economic times, things are difficult. So then when the economy takes an upturn and the expansion takes hold, that is why it's then also called a recovery. So recession contraction means that the economy is doing worse, GDP is getting smaller. Recovery expansion means that the economy is getting stronger, GDP is getting bigger. Although we have these ups and downs in the business cycle, over time they have a general direction that they go. Notice that this red arrow that I added to the chart is inclined upward. That means that over time the economy is going to get bigger and bigger. At a given moment it may be getting smaller, but the general trend over our country's history is for the economy to continually grow. Another way to look at the business cycle can be seen in this chart. Now, you notice over on the left-hand axis that there are numbers. There's positive numbers up above, and then a 0, and then negative numbers down below. This is representing the percentage of change in the gross domestic product. So when we're below that line of 0, that means that gross domestic product is getting smaller. When we're above that line, it means that gross domestic product is getting bigger. Now, what you'll notice is that the economy spends most of its time above that line. The economy grows more often than it contracts. That's why over time we have this general trend of the economy getting bigger. But there are periods every now and then when it does contract, and those are highlighted by the gray bars. Now, the gray bars aren't quite as wide as the areas where the economy is getting smaller, and there's a reason for that. These gray bars represent recessions as they are officially defined by the U.S. government. And that is any 2 quarters in a row, in other words, 2 3-month sections of the year in a row, when the economy is getting smaller. We then call that a recession. So if the economy gets smaller just for 1 quarter, they don't call that a recession. It has to be at least 2 quarters in a row. So when we have at least 2 quarters in a row, maybe more, of the economy getting smaller, they define that as a recession, and those are marked in the gray bars. So we can see that during these periods when the bouncing line representing the growth rate of GDP is below that 0 line, we have the gray bars for recessions, and when it's above, we then have the white bars representing times of economic growth. You can see that there are fluctuations back and forth between these things. You have a recession, then you have growth. You have recession, you have growth. You have recession, you have growth, etc. They happen over and over again. That's the business cycle. But please notice that there's no real pattern to this. Sometimes recessions last for a long time. Sometimes they go really deep. Sometimes they're very brief and they're shallow. We don't know. We can't predict when they'll happen. They just do. In the next lesson of this course, we're going to be next lesson of this unit, we're going to be talking about how the government tries to intervene in the economy, intervene in the business cycle. And I'll mention this again then, but I'll just do it right now while I have this chart up. They can't really stop these ups and downs from happening, but what the government's going to try to do is just smooth them out a little bit so that the recessions aren't so deep. And we'll talk about that more in the next lesson, but we've got a few more ideas to cover in this one first. So as we have these ups and downs in the economy, what is the personal impact for people? One way people feel these ups and downs in the economy is through unemployment. In other words, people losing their jobs. Unemployment increases during times of recession. The economy's not doing well, businesses aren't making money, they don't need as many workers, they lay people off, we have unemployment increasing. In contrast, during times of expansion when things are going well, inflation takes place. Lots of people have lots of jobs, they're making lots of money, they're trying to spend it to buy things, there's competition to buy things. And now the people selling the stuff can charge more for it because more people want it. And when they charge more for it, prices go up across the board. That's what we call inflation. It is when prices increase. So why does the economy go through these ups and downs of the business cycle? Well, those concepts that I just talked about of unemployment and inflation can help explain this. Let's build a different sort of diagram now of the business cycle. Let's begin with a period of expansion. Times are going well, the economy is getting bigger, and people are prospering. As I already explained, one of the things that can happen as a result of that is inflation. Because people have more money and they can buy more things, now people are competing with each other to buy those more things, and the people selling them can raise the prices and still sell them and make more profit for themselves. And so you get this general trend across the economy for prices to go up. But as a result of those prices going up, then they end up going up a little too far. People end up saying, I can't afford that now. They stop buying. When they stop buying, then the companies that are producing the things are producing too much because they aren't selling anymore. And so then they don't have to have as many workers. They start laying people off. The economy starts doing worse. And we end up in what we call a recession. Then during the recession, because things are not going well, the businesses don't need to employ as many people. They lay people off and we have unemployment increase. But that unemployment increase is then the seeds of the recovery. Because when people become unemployed, then they're willing to work for less money. They're willing to take worse jobs. And in doing that, they cut the costs for the employers, which then allow the employers to sell their products more cheaply, which then causes consumers to want to buy more of those products, which then creates greater demand. The producers start producing more, they have to hire more people get more jobs, they start earning more money, and we're back to an expansion. The economy is growing again. So this is a continual loop that the economy goes through, going from expansion to recession because of these changes in inflation and unemployment along the way. All right, that completes this lesson. Now let's review what we learned. How is the strength of the economy measured? Is it measured by the prime lending rate, the gross domestic product, the federal funds rate, or the federal deficit? The strength of the economy is measured by the gross domestic product. What controls the U.S. economy? Is it the president? Is it Congress? Is it the Federal Reserve Board? Or is it the free market? The free market controls the economy. While those other things listed here, the President, Congress, the Federal Reserve Board, which you'll learn more about in the next lesson, may have an impact on the economy, they don't have enough force to really control it. It's the private choices that people make in the free market that really controls the economy. What is a decline in the business cycle called? Is it called an expansion? Is it called a recovery? Is it called an overload? Or is it called a contraction? A decline in the business cycle is called a contraction. And if it's sustained long enough, then they end up calling it a recession also. Contraction and recession, as you recall, refer to when the economy is not doing well. And what's the opposite? Well, if the economy is doing well, we call it an expansion, or we call it a recovery. What is a common personal impact of a recession? Is it inflation that you experience in a recession? Is it investment that you engage in a recession? Is it unemployment that you suffer in a recession? Or is it surplus that you enjoy during a recession? During a recession, a common personal impact is for people to become unemployed. That completes this lesson. The next lesson will also be from Unit 11. It'll be Lesson 6 about monetary policy.